Hi there, and this is another lesson in BCIT TTED 5060 on how to make your tethered mini sumo robot or your mini sumo robot. In fact, this applies to a lot of different things because right now I want to answer the question I usually get about where do I get these lovely tires from? Because having a good tire with a good coefficient of friction to transfer your drive shaft's drive axle's force to the ground is going to be really critical. And we've got a neat process here that was, well, I mean, it's just general casting techniques, but in the mini sumo context was pioneered by my predecessor in the job, Paul Whitenbrock, and that is casting your own tires. Now, there's a number of different ways to do it, and in my mini sumo guidebook, I talk about the way I used to do this at David Thompson Secondary, but I think this is really the superior way because you can make these tires in advance and have them sitting in a big box ready to go when your students come along to need them. And the whole trick is having the right materials prepared in advance and having your molds made up. So let me just pick these ones out. I've already made those ones and cast them up, and those are going to be ready for my students to use on their mini sumos. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how this is made. Now, as you can see, the mold is an absolutely critical part of having this ready to go. And I've got molds where we've got different sizes of tire available for the students to choose from, so they can design different size tires for their mini sumo robot. And these molds are made from a silicone casting resin. And this is one right here is called Mold Max 40. Okay, and we've got the curing compound right there and the big bucket of Mold Max right here. This is available from Coast Fiber Tech in Vancouver. They're on Boundary Road. I'm sure you can get it from other places. And you know, they've got excellent materials about the different solutions that they have on their website. They do a lot of work for the film industry and special effects, so it's worth it if you get a chance to go to their store to check it out. And you can cast these blocks right here. These ones were made by students in the program last year, and they took a couple away with them. To start, what they did was they turned aluminum tires in the size that they wanted, and they used the knurling tool to put a little bit of pattern on the outside of them, so you can see that pattern repeated right on here. So basically they made the aluminum equivalent of this tire right here, and then they laid them flat in a box, sealed box about like so. They had 8 of the tires laid in there, and then they mixed up and poured the silicone casting compound over top of it. You know, spray everything down with mold release, follow the instructions on how to use your Mold Max 40, and you end up with a little block something like this. Now the color indicates that it's Mold Max 40 from what I understand. The 40 refers to the shore hardness or the stiffness of it. So again, you can talk to them about what you want to do, and the people at Coast Fiber Tech really know their products well, and they can give you something specific for your solution, but I find the Mold Max 40 works just fine. Now, if you're just doing a couple of one-offs, you don't always need to have a silicone mold. Here's a technique that I developed that uses a 3D printed mold, and actually here it is in a bigger pattern right here. And what you can see is that we've 3D printed the wheel, and around the outside of the wheel I've 3D printed a mold for the tire, and then this on the back right here, this is the raft. You print it with a raft and spray everything down with a bit of mold release, because when you cast your urethane into here, you want to be able to snap this away, and if it doesn't have mold release on it, you're going to have a problem. And you can snap the raft away, and hopefully you've got a good seal where the raft meets right there. You can see you can add some glitter right in there if you want. This becomes garbage. And then you use a pair of snips. You snip the outer ring off right here, and you can go ahead, and after that's broken free and you clean it up a little bit, you get a tire that looks something like this. And this one's stuck on really nicely, but this one right here, you can see I've even added a couple of little tabs right in there that have been cast right in there. So that wheel is stuck on there really, really tightly. Get back in there. Anyway, I'll do that after the video. So you can do that in different diameters, and so if you need a custom diameter wheel for your tethered mini Sumo, you can go ahead and you can 3D print that out, and you pour your polyurethane casting resin right in there, and lo and behold, you've got a custom cast-in-place wheel. By and large, though, what we mainly do is we make the tire, and then you create a wheel, and you can 3D print it. You can turn it on the lathe. You can just use a piece of dowel if you want. Drill a hole out of the middle and press it onto your axle, and you know, then just friction fit that tire right onto your wheel, and they come out looking, I don't know, I think that looks pretty good. So there we go. You can cast different colors right into your tires. So I've got black tires, I've got red tires, I've got, well, these were supposed to be white, they kind of came out pinky. I've got different tires, okay? And so let's take a look at how we go about making those. I'm going to make a batch to, well, I'll start with some small and medium size tires because that's what I need. You know, we could do some big ones too if I've got a little bit of extra material left over. So anyway, you'll notice that I've got a drop cloth down right here, and I've got some gloves. These materials are not particularly toxic, so if you, well, I don't always put my gloves on, but since I'm recording this and you know, showing it, let's glove up and follow good procedures. The other thing is I'm doing this at one of the electronics workbenches. There's actually an oscilloscope right down over there. I'd never do it right at the electronics workbench, not even with adult students. You're gonna get this stuff everywhere. Again, big drop cloth off in a corner of the room where nobody's gonna get too upset if they spill something. You can usually let it set up and dry for a bit. So what we're using to make our tires is Vitaflex pourable urethane rubber. And again, this is available at Coast Fiber Tech in Vancouver. And you'll notice this one says Vitaflex 30. I've also used Vitaflex 20. This number refers to the shore hardness, so a lower number means a softer material. And sometimes with the Vitaflex 20, you get a tire that maybe has slightly higher coefficient of friction because it's more easily deformable. But I actually like the 30 because it's got a little more durable, a little tougher, doesn't break as easily, and seems to last a long time. Now, I'm almost out of this material right here. Usually when I buy it, I write the date on it somewhere because it can, anyway, it doesn't last on the shelf for a long time. I usually find you want to use it up within a year of when you buy it. And it's a two-part compound, works kind of like a lot of one-to-one ratio epoxies. It's got directions and warnings and everything on the back. You know, read your MSDS and all that on all materials before you bring them into your classroom. And yeah, there we go, limited shelf life use as soon as possible. Here we go. Let's take a look at how we end up doing this. I've got a clean mixing cup right here. Now you can mix these using either volume or weight. I find that I like to use the scale here a little bit. I'll put my cup on there, I'll tear the scale so that that's reading 0, and then I'll open the top right here. The yellow container can be really a bit of a pain to pour, and it's the thicker material. It absorbs a little bit of moisture when you leave it sitting on the shelf, so it's really important that you seal this up nicely when you're all done working with it. But it's also really important that you don't leave any goop from your pour sitting around right here on these edges, because if you do, that will start to cure and you'll essentially glue the lid back on there. So after you're done pouring this, make sure that you wipe off anything that's sitting on those edges right there. Okay, now normally I get in there and scrape to get a little bit more out of there and get my very last little bit out of this container. In fact, let's see if I can. This is my last little bit, so I want to get every gram that I can out of there, because I'll be throwing this container out after this and going to buy some more. And that looks like about everything that I'm going to get out of there, and that weighs 33 grams. Great, now I've got a sticky stick somewhere. And if I hadn't used up the entire container, I'd make sure I clean off anything that spilled on that edge before putting the top on and sealing it up really tightly, because otherwise that cures itself in place. So we're at 34 grams, and I hit tear again, and that gives me a 0 right on there, and I want to put 34 grams of the second part in there. And it's pretty important that you get very close to 1-to-1 ratios, because otherwise it doesn't mix very nicely at all, and it doesn't set up properly. If you've done a poor job of mixing, you'll know about it, because you'll be very disappointed in your results. There we go. So I've got 34 grams of each of them, and after you've used the compound for a while with your molds, you'll start to know how much you need to accomplish what it is that you want. Now, as you can see, that's not a particularly lovely color, so I've got a few different colorants that I can add. In fact, I've got a lovely set of colorants that I picked up at Coast Fiber Tech, and they have these fluorescent pigments. Ooh, they glow under ultraviolet light. So glow-in-the-dark ones works great. I'm just going to go for black, because a lot of people like their tires to be black, and I've got a big thing of black compound right here. And let me just use a clean stir stick. You don't want to get any of your contamination right in there. And oh, that's more than enough. The black is a pretty potent compound, so you just need a little dab. What the heck, put it right in there, and then put your compound away, put that lid back on, and keep everything nice and tidy while you're doing this. You're not in a big rush to get things done. You do have a limited working time. You don't want to walk away and get a coffee, but now what you want to do is you want to stir this up. And you want to get good stirring in here. You have to get everything mixed together. I recommend stirring for at least a minute and getting in there, lifting that bottom up, working right into the corners. And if you can see any streaks or any distortions in the color or anything like that, you've got a problem. I'm just going to press pause right here and stir it up for about a minute. You don't need to watch all that. Okay, and we're back, and as you can see, I've been stirring for a minute. Everything is really smoothly mixed in there. Maybe black wasn't the best color for showing how smoothly mixed everything is, but it's all blended together. If you don't do that and you don't get a good mix on it, then it's just not going to cure properly. You're going to have a big mess a day or two later when you come back to clean all this up. So here we go. That's ready to pour, and I've got 2 molds ready to go. And you can try to pour it down into the actual holes, but what I sometimes do is I just fill up the top and I let it slide down into those holes right there. Now, obviously, the more you mix, the more you have for filling up your molds. I was at the end of the bucket, so I got what I got. As you get to know your molds, you'll get to know the appropriate masses and volumes, if you prefer to measure it using volume, for mixing things up. Now, as you can see, I've over poured on some and under poured on others. And this is where a nice piece of sheet metal or even another stir stick or something like that comes in handy, because we can just take this and we can say this one could use a little bit more, and just scrape that top surface nice and smooth. And if you've got some left over right there, start bringing it down and sweep it into another hole right here. This one could use A little bit more. You want to make sure they get filled up to the top, but they're not left sitting with a whole bunch of waste material doing absolutely nothing for you. Okay, and over here, this one could probably use smoothing up to the top. And let me just move some of that right down there. We'll focus on filling these two up first, because you don't want to leave one partly empty. Well, you can actually. It sometimes generates a neat effect if you half fill one of them with one color, and then you come back and top it up with another color afterwards. Okay, I've still got a little bit more compound here. Let's fill these two up. And let's fill these two up. Now, if you're doing more sophisticated casting, keep in mind these are just mini Sumo tires that we're making right here. You can get vacuum curing chambers so that you can get all the bubbles out of your molding compounds. You can do all sorts of really neat things to make a higher quality cast. And that's filling up right in there. This looks like I might have enough to get another one out. Right in here. And you want to scrape everything out and use every little bit that you've got. This stuff's not ridiculously expensive, but it is valuable enough that you don't want to waste it. And really, we don't want to put things in landfills unnecessarily anyway. There's really no way to recycle this that I know of when you're done with it. So scrape every little bit of that compound out. And let's get in here. We got a bit of extra right here. We'll use that to top that one up right down here. Let everything smooth out right in there, and then we'll drag some of that material over this way. Lists your working time with this is about half an hour, and again, you get material, compound from a different vendor or something like that. You might have a longer or shorter working time, but it's nice. This means that it should be set up by the next day. It'll start to set up in a matter of hours, but there we have that. I think that's about as much as I'm getting onto that one right there. And again, you want to give it, once you get them all filled up, you want to give them a little bit of a scrape right across the top so that you don't have to come along later on and separate extra material from them. It just makes it a lot easier when it comes time to take them out of the mold, that you don't have to clean these up because they all come out really nicely and smoothly. And I think I've got the perfect amount to at least partly fill this last one up right here. Maybe I'm only going to get 7 on this side. Okay, I think we're just about done. Scrape those tops nice and clean. Try and drag it over top of that last one where I'm putting all my extra material. And you can fuss around with this for a little while. You don't need a video of me being obsessive about using every last drop of urethane. Looks like you might get one, but I think that's about as far as we're going to go right there. Maybe I'll top up the other half of that with red next time I'm mixing things up. Okay, so there we go. Those are going to sit there, and don't put them right near the window if it's winter and it's cold outside. It takes them longer to cure that way. Generally, I'll leave them just indoors at room temperature in about 12 hours, maybe even a little bit less if you're lucky. These should be cured up enough that you can pull them out of the molds and start your next batch. So what we were using right there, we used Vitaflex 30. Okay, it's a urethane rubber compound. That was what we mixed up to make the tires themselves. We used a pigment with them, okay, and we were casting them in molds made out of a silicone compound called Mold Max 40. And that silicone compound is really, really nice because it doesn't stick to the urethane compounds. The two are like oil and water to each other, really. And that means that I didn't have to use any mold release on here. If I was doing something that was likely to stick to the silicone, or when I'm making the silicone molds and I'm worried that it might stick to the aluminum tires, you can spray a little bit of mold release on. This is essentially, it's essentially a spray oil, like some of your cooking oils, but with a few compounds that make it work better for your polymer casting. You can do all sorts of neat things once you get going with this technique. For instance, you don't have to cast with urethane. Here's some that I cast out of epoxy, and I could have put fiberglass in here and then cast the epoxy right in here. I don't know why I'd want a hard, inflexible mini Sumo tire, but yeah, all sorts of neat techniques that you can do in your shop for fairly low cost and come up with some really great stuff. So there you go. There'll be a batch of tethered mini Sumo tires here ready to go in about 12 hours.